and delighted to have you join us this afternoon for our last of our several offerings we had during January, which was still is National Mentoring Month. And that's part of what the faculty mentoring program does as part of the Campus Council on Faculty Life, and in the Office of the Vice Provost for Academic Affairs is offer a number of activities in January and kind of in recognition of Mentoring Month, and to continue to help support a climate and culture mentorship at UCSF. And I see several familiar names from yesterday's session, which is great to have you join us again. I had a session yesterday on mentorship and sponsorship, and a session earlier this month on mentoring up as well, that was focused more on mentees at UCSF. And today we're delighted and thrilled to have Brian Aldridge, our Vice Provost for Academic Affairs, talk to us about everything you want to know and need to know about advancement and promotion at UCSF. And Dr. Aldridge also will be focusing on, I know what's on a lot of faculty minds about kind of the impact of COVID-19 on advancement promotion and all issues around that. So thanks for joining us, and thank you, Brian, for being here today. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks, Mitch. It's totally my pleasure. Thanks everyone for joining. I really appreciate it. This might be more than you want to know, but more likely less than you really want to know about advancing at UCSF. I certainly do not intend, I think we have 90 minutes for the session, is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. I certainly don't intend to use the 90 minutes talking, being a talking head for that time. So I want to allow ample time for questions. There were a few questions that were submitted to Irene and to Mitch before, and I want to make sure that I answer those. And then any other questions that come up during the session. If there is an easy way, I can't monitor the screen and look at my slides. If someone does want to raise their hand and ask a specific question during the presentation, I'm certainly not opposed to that. I'll rely on Mitch as the kind of moderator of the chat function, and also kind of looking around to see if people have questions. To feel free to, Mitch, to interrupt me and say someone has a question that they'd like answered now rather than waiting to the end. I'm totally open to that. So whatever works. Great, thanks very much. So we'll spend this time hopefully clarifying what to many folks is a confusing and definitely an opaque process at UCSF, and one that certainly I, as a junior faculty member, had significant anxiety about, and I'm not sure if and when that anxiety probably lapsed a bit when I took on this role, because then I really understood the process from a very different perspective. But I recognize that it can be a very stressful issue, and particularly as to Mitch's opening comments in this particular time, given the challenges that so many of us are facing around the pandemic and the kind of environment that we're existing in, both personally and professionally, because of this pandemic. So I hope to answer your question. I'll start by just pointing out what I think are some helpful resources. On the left-hand side is the newly updated website for our office, the Office of Faculty and Academic Affairs. If you've historically ever looked at our website and tried to find information and found it either confusing or difficult, I think you'll find the new site to be much easier to navigate. It certainly is for me. This site includes information, of course, on policies, both system-wide policies and UCSF-specific policies around the issue of academic advancement. But it also includes a lot of really interesting and valuable information about mentoring, opportunities for leadership training, family-friendly policies, leadership development opportunities, a number of different things that go beyond just the mechanics of or the steps within academic review. So that's a site that I think you could find useful. I have to say, though, that the middle panel here is a really important one if you're relatively new to UCSF or really do have some questions specifically about academic advancement differences in series. It's, as you can see, it's called the Faculty Handbook for Success. This is a document that is a distillation of the really lengthy and difficult to comprehend university and system-wide policies that we really operate under. So the Faculty Handbook is meant to be a very user-friendly guide to really give folks an overview and I would say a little bit more than a surface level understanding of what goes into academic review, what's required of faculty in different series, you know, the length of time one might spend at a certain rank before advancing to associate professor, for example. But I will say that that handbook itself is not academic policy. It's a, as I said, it's a user-friendly kind of summary of academic policy. So it was recently updated, as you can see, just a couple of months ago by the Academic Senate. It's available in PDF form on the Academic Senate website. And the link is there. And then the other resource that I'll point you to on the right-hand side of the slide is developed also by the Academic Senate, specifically by CAP, the Committee on Academic Personnel. And it's often referred to as PMAP, which, as you can see, stands for Personalized Mentoring Advancement Promotion Module. So this is a module that was created by the Academic Senate, and you can access it through My Access. And when you do that, when you log in through My Access, the PMAP module knows automatically your identity, of course, but it also knows your rank and your step, and it provides more customized or more targeted, I should say, information that's specific to your series and specific to either the rank you're at now or the one that you might be going to in the future. So that's also a helpful resource. So I'd encourage you to check out those. Definitely, if you're new to UCSF or really feel like you don't understand a whole lot about academic advancement, definitely check out the Handbook for Success. Okay, who are the people that are important to your academic advancement? Well, there's a list of folks who can serve, who will assist you or can serve as resources. And at the top, I have listed here the HR shared services representative. Sometimes they're referred to as HR generalists. You might hear that term. These are the folks who are play a key role in terms of handling the logistics of assembling your academic review dossier. Oftentimes they'll work with somebody from your home department who has a direct connect to the HR generalist. These folks are very well versed in the academic policies that I was referring to earlier, the ones that are in what's called the Academic Personnel Manual. And they're very, very helpful resources. And they're folks that you'll interact with through the promotion process. The next level is folks who are more specific to your department. And I've included here mentor chair. There may be others who are not necessarily either one of those roles, but are kind of trusted and valuable colleagues for you. They can certainly give you more customized input and advice on what expectations might exist within your department, specifically for academic advancement, and they're very, very helpful. The next level, at least going down on the slide, are the vice and associate deans of academic affairs within each one of your schools. You can see their names listed here. In dentistry, Sunita Mutha is interim associate dean for academic affairs. In medicine, Elena Fuentes-Affleck is the vice dean for academic affairs, and Renee Bender and Paul Garcia serve as associate deans. And they work as a very tight-knit group and are very valuable resources. And then you can see Catherine Waters and Tom Kearney in nursing and pharmacy. These folks are reviewers in the academic review chain. They will review your packet as it goes through for academic advancement. But beyond that, they're also very useful resources for you. Ones that you can go to for input or advice And they're very knowledgeable both about academic policy and how things play out in some of the gray zones where even someone like your mentor or your chair might not really be quite sure how to approach a particular thing. An example could be, say you're thinking, you've talked to colleagues and you think you deserve a 3-year acceleration in advancement. You want to advance 3 years sooner than would be normal. It's not uncommon for mentors or chairs to have relatively little experience with that type of advancement, but your dean's office will have experience with those kind of things. And then at the campus level, at the bottom of the slide, there's myself and then the assistant vice provost, who is Emerald Light. And we're also, of course, available, but usually going from the top of the slide to the bottom of the slide in progression is the way that most faculty go to try and get answers to their questions. The other thing that I wanted to say here is just a caveat, and that is that very experienced and very well-meaning and very talented people at UCSF may, in some cases, have very little experience with a very specialized circumstance that you might be in. And so I think it's very important, if you're getting input or you're getting advice that either doesn't seem right to you, or perhaps it conflicts with information that's been given to you by others, then I would really strongly encourage you to go kind of the next level down on this slide, to seek input and to really get clarity on your specific situation. That's not usually necessary for things that you could answer easily by looking at the faculty handbook, for example, but if there are very specialized circumstances, then I would encourage you to go further in terms of trying to get a clear answer that makes sense to you and seems to comport or at least reconcile things that you've heard other places on the campus. Okay, details all faculty should know. So in order to understand and to kind of plan out your academic advancement, there are certain things that you really need to know as a starting point. One, of course, is your faculty series. For example, Clinical X series, that's the series that I'm in. That's an example of a faculty series. Rank, that could be assistant, associate, or full professor, and then the step within a rank. We'll talk more about those specifically in a moment. I'm sure you know what your take-home salary is already, but it's also good to know something that's called covered compensation. I don't have a lot of time to talk about faculty compensation, but I'll direct you to a slide deck that's actually quite useful, associated with Faculty Development Day. So it's available on our website. There's a dedicated presentation that's done by Emerald Light recently, that gives you information on faculty salary, how they're structured and things. But this concept of covered compensation is an important one because it's the portion of your total salary that, quote unquote, counts for calculation of your retirement benefits. For most of us who are in the health sciences compensation plan, it tends to be our scale on the compensation plan. So you may have heard, oh, my department is on scale 3, for example. Usually it's that amount exclusive of stipends or clinical incentives or even negotiated or Y compensation. That's considered covered compensation. It's kind of your base compensation under the comp plan. Sources of money, your department administrator can help you with, and then an actual copy of your comp plan is important for you to either have or have access to. So the comp plan itself has they're usually pretty lengthy. They're in the range of like 20 to 28 pages or so, but there are key sections that are important. One will be giving you information on how your compensation is structured. Another is guidance and direction on outside professional activities. So these are activities outside the course and scope of your university responsibilities. So for example, you want to start a company, or you want to do consulting, or you want to engage in some expert witness work, what have you. Those activities are considered outside professional activities, and your comp plan will have specific guidance and rules that one must follow. So I always tell people, anytime you're even considering outside professional activity, make sure that you look at your comp plan before you say yes to it or before you engage in that activity. Because there are some things, for example, if you're a clinician, the comp plan will tell you very explicitly that you are not allowed to engage in clinical activity outside of the university unless it's via a specific contract or a professional services agreement. So sometimes people have done moonlighting without those contracts or service agreements, and it's in violation of the plan, and it can actually cause some pretty significant problems. So at least have access to your comp plan, and definitely check out when you're engaging in outside professional activity. And it also provides information on some important benefits. So things like childbearing, child rearing, extended illness benefits as well. And then I have also listed in the slide, you should have some sense, of course, of what your overall responsibilities and distribution of effort is across your areas of work, what type of support your department or division are offering in terms of space, mentoring, administrative support, things like that. And those things are covered on a document which you may remember reviewing with your chair or may remember signing. It's called the important points for discussion between a chair and a new faculty appointee. It's a structured kind of checklist to make sure that at the time of hire, there's a dialogue to at least cover those basic aspects of what we do as new faculty members at UCSF. Okay, so faculty appointments. UCSF our faculty series are more complicated than many other universities that might have, for example, only tenure and non-tenure track faculty or research and clinical faculty. There are 5 series at UCSF. I'll give you the names of them, I think, on the next slide. But we're definitely different from most institutions. It makes I think once you understand it and once you experience it, it allows for career paths that, the whole range of career paths that we at UCSF and at other UC campuses kind of go down over the course of our career, but it does make the system a little more complicated. In terms of rank, we're fairly typical in comparison with other universities, assistant, associate, and full professor. And then the UC system is kind of unique in terms of having the steps within each one of those ranks. At the assistant professor rank, steps 1 through 4 are the ones that are most commonly used. There's 2 years between steps at that rank, and advancement from one step to the next step is called a merit. So you'll hear that term, merit advancement. There are what are called special steps, steps 5 and 6. These are for people who are at step 4 but need a little more time or a little more productivity in a particular area in order to be ready to advance to the associate rank. And most people will spend somewhere between, unless you come in with previous experience, in the range of 6 to 8 years at the assistant rank before moving on. At the associate rank, there are 3 steps typically, and then there are also some special steps if needed. And there are 2 years between steps at the associate rank. So most faculty spend 6 years at the associate rank. And then at the full professor rank, there are steps 1 through 9. Each merit advancement is at 3-year intervals at the professor rank. So it's different than the other 2. And then you can even progress beyond that to something called above scale, which doesn't apply to a whole lot of people at UCSF. And if you are at above scale, then you probably already know all this stuff. Okay, so I mentioned there are 5 faculty series at UCSF. They're listed here and categorized by what's called academic senate membership and non-senate membership. This is a distinction that's made in system-wide, that means across the entire, all UC campuses in policies, but there are less distinct and important differences to call out here at UCSF, and I'll say why that is in just a moment. The other thing I want to say is these are not necessarily listed in any kind of hierarchy. It's not like ladder rank faculty or most prestigious faculty and others are lesser in some particular order. That's not the case at all. But you can see we have ladder rank professors, which are tenure track. Only 9% of people at UCSF are in a tenure track appointment. It's a very small number. The professor in resident series and the professor of clinical X series. So by system-wide policy, those are called academic senate faculty series, which from a system-wide perspective means that those faculty are empowered by policy to participate in the shared governance of the university. And then there are non-senate, what are termed non-senate faculty series. These are the adjunct professor series and the health sciences clinical professor series. And at UCSF, about 45% of our faculty are in the health sciences clinical professor series, so very significant number. And I think the next slide talks about, like at UCSF, what are the important distinctions that I need to be aware of being either in a Senate series or in a non-Senate series. And the overall answer to this is that there aren't a whole lot of distinctions. Some of them, there are a couple, and they may be important to you, so we'll talk about them. But the history of this is that UCSF has pushed system-wide several times to try and get all of our faculty, including the adjunct and the health sciences clinical faculty, recognized as participants in shared governance and to have automatic academic senate status. We haven't been successful yet, but what we have done is in terms of in areas of our control to confer the benefits of Senate membership as broadly as we can to as many non-Senate faculty as possible. So looking at the first row in the slide, our non-Senate faculty participate in shared governance. You can see that they serve on academic Senate committees, all of the academic Senate committees, with the exception of what's called the Privilege and Tenure Committee, and that there are certain bylaw reasons for that. Senate and non-Senate faculty vote on each other's academic actions. So an adjunct professor can vote on the promotion of the ladder rank professor and vice versa. Participation in the UC-sponsored mortgage origination home loan program is a distinction that's out of our control. Locally, it's managed at the Office of the President. That's important to some people. I will say that depending on the current kind of fiscal or financial environment broadly, sometimes the mortgage origination program looks better than what one can get on the outside market or on the typical market, and sometimes it doesn't look as good. So it's not like it's a windfall that Senate faculty get and non-Senate faculty don't get. Sometimes it's beneficial. Other times people who have access to it figure out, oh, I can get a little bit better deal on the open market and not go through the UC home loan program. There is a distinction in terms of filing a grievance with the Privilege and Tenure Committee. That's just codified in UC system-wide bylaws that we can't get around. That's not going to be an issue for probably anybody on this call. It's pretty rare. And then both our Senate faculty and our non-Senate faculty are eligible for professional development leave. You might think of it as quote unquote sabbatical leave, but sabbatical is a more specific term, but that's essentially what I'm talking about by development leave. And I'll mention sabbatical, I think, in an upcoming slide. Okay, so there are 5 faculty series. What's the distinction between them in terms of the expectations in order to move forward and progress up the ranks? Well, the first thing I think it's important to recognize is on the left-hand side, the column there, it lists the 4 areas, the 4 primary areas of academic review. There's teaching and mentoring, research and creative work, sometimes referred to, I tend to prefer to refer to it as scholarly and creative activity rather than research and creative work, but oftentimes those phrases are used interchangeably. Professional competence, and then university and public service. And then the number of plus signs just gives you a general sense about where the series differ and where they don't. The ladder rank and the in-resident series have identical expectations for academic advancement. Of course, the in-resident series faculty don't have a quote unquote FTE that's state funded. Even the state-funded FTE doesn't fund the full FTE, but in residence faculty, usually, as many of you probably know, if you're in that series, you will know if you're in that series, most in residence faculty are required to generate either all or a substantial portion of their salary through extramural contracts grants, other types of activities to fund their salary. And so excellence in all 4 areas of review is required to move forward. The Clinical X series is similar, but I have 2 plus signs there just to remind me to let you know that because the focus in that series is really on teaching and clinical service, the expectations for scholarly creative activity are not as high in terms of, I would say, quantity, and there's also more flexibility, if I could use that term, in what type of activities are really considered scholarly or creative activities. It certainly doesn't require hypothesis-driven research in order to advance in the Clinical X series. Certainly that could be an area of scholarly activity, but it doesn't have to be. I would say that the key distinction for the scholarly activity in the Clinical X series is that the work needs to be disseminated outside of the university. It can't, it really, for example, in publications, in curricula that are adopted elsewhere, in models of clinical care that have been discussed or written up and distributed or adopted at other health institutions. The adjunct professor series is characterized basically by a significant imbalance in activity. So in this particular example, I've given 3 pluses in the research and creative activity, but our adjunct faculty at UCSF tend to either focus on research and creative activity as their primary activity, in which case the requirements in that particular area of review are high, as they are in the other series, or at UCSF, it's not uncommon to have adjunct faculty who focus on teaching and mentoring as their primary activity. So at least one of the areas needs to, you really need to demonstrate excellence. And in the other areas of your review, you have to do something in order to advance. You can't do nothing in the other areas of review, but the requirements are much lower. And then the health sciences clinical series, I'm sure many of you are probably in that series. Again, the focus is on teaching and clinical activity. There is some requirement for scholarly creative activity, which I'll talk about in just a moment, but it's not, there's even more flexibility. I talked about flexibility in the Clinical X series. I would say that flexibility about what's considered scholarly or creative in the clinical and health sciences clinical series is even greater. Okay, so these are some comparing the 5 series with regard to a number of different rules or privileges that are listed on the left-hand column here. The first one is tenure. Of course, only the ladder appointees in the ladder rank series are eligible for tenure. Then the word no appears in every other category. And again, over 90% of our faculty aren't even eligible for tenure. And then the length of appointment just means the time period over which your faculty appointment needs to be re-upped within the department. For Clinical X, adjunct, and health sciences clinical, it's yearly. And for the in-resident series at the assistant professor rank, it's yearly, but it can be longer if you're an associate or full professor in the in-resident series. We talked about Senate membership already, so I won't cover that. Sabbatical, that word refers to, at least in university speak, refers to state-funded sabbatical. And so, of course, only the ladder rank faculty who have state funding to support their faculty salary are eligible for that type of sabbatical. But the other series are eligible for the professional development leave that I think I mentioned earlier. In the adjunct and the health sciences clinical series, it needs to be approved by exception. Usually the issue is, regardless of whether you're in the in-residence or one of the other series to the right of that, is, how are you going to cover your salary during that professional development leave? Do you have a mechanism to do that? Can you work out the details of, clinical coverage or other type of coverage of other teaching activities, for example, with your department to allow you to take that professional development leave? So it's not a guarantee that you can have it, but there is a mechanism. If it can be, you can work out the details with your division chief or department chair to make it happen. Okay, appraisal. Appraisal is, you may not have heard or gone through an appraisal, but appraisal is a full academic review that takes place at the beginning of the 4th year of your service as an assistant professor at UCSF. And its intent is to establish your readiness for an upcoming promotion to the associate rank. At UCSF, we will automatically do an appraisal for all faculty in an academic senate series. And for the health sciences clinical and the adjunct series faculty, it can be requested either through your department or through your dean's office, but it's not done automatically. And one of the reasons that we don't do it automatically relates to the next row down, which is this thing called the 8-year rule. What that refers to is an 8-year limitation on service at the assistant professor rank that applies to academic senate series faculty. So basically, if you're an assistant appointee in ladder rank series, for example, you have 8 years in order to be promoted to the associate rank. Otherwise, practically what happens at UCSF most of the time is one would then change to a different series that doesn't have that 8-year rule, or a series that more fits their accomplishments to allow them to then advance to the associate professor rank. That 8-year rule does not apply to the health sciences clinical series, and it doesn't apply to the adjunct series faculty. So that's one of the reasons that we don't automatically do appraisals, because the consequences are a little bit different depending on the outcome of the appraisal. And then percent time, the bottom row here, the expectation is that for ladder rank, in residence, and clinical X, that faculty will devote their primary professional commitment to the university, and the expectation is 100% time service. Now there's an asterisk, or there's a footnote here, number 6, that says that there are exceptions that are possible for family needs. These, many people have gotten the message that regardless of any personal circumstance, I can never be less than 100% time in the in-residence series, for example. There is a mechanism through the university to permit less than 100% time for family reasons, but that process begins with a discussion with your division chief and department chair, because it needs to be an arrangement that works kind of for both parties. It's not an automatic right that one has. But importantly, there is not a university prohibition from ever going less than 100% time. And then appointees in the adjunct and health sciences clinical can be any percent.
Brian, this is Mitch. I have a question that may be relevant to others in the meeting as well about appraisals. In the Department of Medicine, and this may be true in other departments as well, faculty who are hired as researchers and are often hired in the adjunct series with the intention of being promoted into the in-residence series. These are faculty who benefit greatly by an appraisal, but are not offered the appraisal because they're not in a Senate series at the time. What I've been told by the department is that they're actually therefore not eligible for an appraisal, but you're reminding me that it's available, that they can have it if they ask for it. It just isn't offered to them automatically. Is that right? Or are they just not supposed to get it at all?
Well, first of all, the appraisals that are mandated by policy where it says yes, they all come to me, so I see them all. The ones where it says available upon request never come to me, so I don't see them. So that's one caveat. I've given this presentation in front of the vice and associate deans of dentistry, pharmacy, nursing, and medicine probably 4 dozen times over the last X number of years. And my understanding is that either at the department or at the school level, there can be a mechanism. I am not sure. I can't say that there's a guarantee that it will be given, but there certainly is no prohibition on doing it. And some departments may have kind of either legitimate from their perspective or from some other perspective reason for not permitting it. But there certainly is no prohibition from doing an appraisal. So I think I would probably start at the department level. And if they say, oh, we don't have a mechanism for doing that, or we've never done it before, then if they're open to at least considering it, then I would have a discussion with the person at the dean's office. But that's really interesting because I actually hadn't heard that before.
Yeah, thank you. That's helpful because I think it could be extremely helpful for junior faculty for them to get a sense of whether they're on track or not on track, particularly when they're being appraised in terms of their research productivity. Are they on track for promotion?
Right. Yeah. The appraisal. I mean, the way that appraisals are structured, though, is that they're being appraised to advance to the associate rank within the series that they're in. So there isn't necessarily an appraisal to say that's designed to say if you should go to a different series. That certainly could be if the result of your adjunct appraisal is you're doing spectacularly in research and you're doing much more than we would expect of you in service and in teaching and professional competence, that's a pretty good, I think, clue that you might be a really good candidate to move to the in-residency.
Yeah, that's helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, so we talked about that there are 4 main criteria for academic advancement. In terms of weighting or criteria, we said that there's differences by series. That's what I mean by series dependent. I also have the notation here, department defined. Some departments actually have documents that codify the expectations more specifically than the academic personnel manual at a campus level does. What the expectations are to move to associate or move to full professor within a particular series. So it's always a good idea to just make sure if your department has such more explicit criteria that you know about them and you have access to. And then for getting more detailed information about promotions and what the expectations are within a series, there is one section of the academic personnel manual that I think is comprehensible to almost all faculty. I could understand it before I was in this role. It actually kind of talks about it's divided by series, and it gives more language and more context around what the university is looking for in each one of the 4 areas of review. Some of that is incorporated into this presentation, but I can't cover everything, and it may serve you well to actually look at that before you're kind of coming up for your advancement. That's the one section of the APM I might direct almost all faculty to. Otherwise, it's pretty hard to comprehend. Okay, academic review during this pandemic. This is, as I said, as we all know, it's a really important issue and one that's on a lot of people's mind. If you may have seen a couple emails that came from me and Dan Lowenstein about the Stop the Clock that's been instituted for all academic senate faculty. So again, academic senate faculty who are at the assistant rank have this 8-year clock. And we have extended that clock to 9 years automatically for all assistant professors in an academic senate series. You don't need to request it. You don't need to provide any justification, nor are you required to use it. So if for example, your normal advancement schedule would say that you would come up for associate evaluation or promotion to associate on July 1st of 2022, it's automatically been extended to 2023. So what we advise, and I think what the dean's offices advise, is that you talk with folks within your department to find at the time that you could potentially be eligible to go up, to find out and get an assessment as to whether it seems you're good to go at 8 years, perhaps even before, or whether you might actually need to use that 9th year. So it's there if you need it, and you're not required to use it. Pre-COVID, up to 2 stop the clocks could be granted. Typically, stop the clock is granted for childbearing leave, could be granted for child rearing leave, personal illness, care of a ill or disabled family member or other relative, things like that. But now with COVID, there's a mechanism to actually grant 3 of those stop the clocks. Again, since the non-Senate faculty are not subject to the 8-year rule, we didn't automatically extend the clock. There really isn't a clock for them. But if any non-Senate faculty wishes to have their evaluation for promotion deferred by a year, as long as you request it, it will be approved. And the 4th year appraisals that we discussed earlier, they're not automatically deferred or delayed, but they can be on request. So that's one change that we've made as a result of the pandemic. The other is the one that weighs on people's, completely justifiably weighs on people's minds is, what are the standards by which I'm going to be judged during this period when my lab either had to be closed or 25 to 50% occupancy for a period of a year or so, or impacted in many other ways that I know that folks are. And I'll say that at UCSF, there's a historic practice of taking an individual family member's situation and context into account in terms of all academic personnel reviews. It has to be reflected somewhere within the packet. So when I get a packet for your promotion, for example, I'm not going to know about particular challenges unless it's represented somewhere within that packet. And I'll talk about how to represent that in just a moment. In terms of positive contributions to COVID, innovations in teaching, research specific to the novel coronavirus, to volunteering to provide clinical care to hospitals outside of San Francisco or outside of the state where there are areas of need. We encourage you to use your CV to document any positive contributions related to the pandemic that you think fit in one of the 4 areas of academic review. In terms of challenges or personal circumstances or professional or limitations on research activity, for example, there's something called a candidate personal statement functionality that already exists in the advanced system. And we encourage folks to use that functionality, and I'll say a little more about it in a moment, to represent the challenges. And you can also use it to represent your positive contributions, but make sure those positive things are also in your CV, please. So that academic reviewers can have access to your explanation of what your experience is during a significant chunk of the review period. And so on the lower half of the slide here, I've listed some examples of either positive contributions or personal or professional challenges that folks on our faculty might have experienced that you might want to highlight in this personal statement. I've been asked a number of times, well, what do people put in the personal statement? And actually at this point, at least at my level of review, I've not seen a personal statement. Most of the folks who are up for promotion effective July 1st of this year, 2021, put their CVs together. Many people put it together sometime, March, April, May of 2020, when, during the very early stages of the pandemic, when the impact might not have been felt or might not have been so great if one considers that the whole review period was either 2 years or 3 years. But I expect that I'll see some, certainly for the next academic review period, and maybe some for the 7/121 period as I start to get more of those packets directly to me. And a number of people have asked for like, how should I describe things? And at this point, it's really my guidance would be kind of just very just practical, I think, at a fairly superficial level. Things like, personal health information. There certainly is, I mean, you can write what you want, but it's not a good idea to put personal health information or protected information. There's no need to give, really detailed justifications, but if you can somehow represent in a way that feels okay and authentic to you, in terms of representing your challenges, I think mostly referring to, then I would encourage you to do that. Historically, most academic review files don't have a personal statement with them. So when we see a personal statement, we always read it, and we will definitely read it going forward. So I think it's a mechanism for us to take into account an individual circumstances. Now, some people or some institutions have been quite specific about how they're dealing with the pandemic in ways that at this point UCSF has not. For example, I've heard some position statements say that the period of academic work during the pandemic should just be completely discarded for academic review. That's not taking place at UCSF. Some folks have said you should automatically get advanced for your next action, regardless of productivity. I'm not aware of any universities that have taken that position, although I have heard of one campus that, at least for merit reviews, is saying you can have, it gets into not even a full merit, but this partial merit that some campuses use. So in terms of being more specific, I would say, again, the first bullet point is vague, but I think that's our guiding principle. It's like, we all know that many faculty are struggling during this period. We already are used to, for example, maybe trading off isn't the right way to put this, but it's the only way I can think of at the moment, kind of really excellent accomplishments in one area for slightly less than expected accomplishments in another area, and saying that on balance, we think that this meets the bar. So in my discussions, at least with the dean's office, and we're going to have a retreat with the members of CAP next week, we've so far, to make sure that we're in alignment, but so far at the dean's office level, the consensus has been the bar is kind of where it used to be for promotion, but we're going to look really hard to make and try very hard to take into account circumstances for kind of borderline cases, or in the same way, for example, sometimes pre-pandemic, we looked at trajectory to figure out if somebody really, they kind of don't have the overall number of or quality of publications we would be looking for, but in the last couple of years, it looks like they're really ramping up. So it's that kind of flexibility that allowed us historically to say, yeah, we think that they should go to the next rank, that we want to apply in terms of evaluating folks and their academic work during the pandemic, because of course the trajectory could be up, but given the huge challenges, it's more likely to be a downward trajectory. But if pre-pandemic things look great, I think it would be personally very important to keep that in mind. Sorry, I'm saying a lot, and it's hard to get any feedback as whether it's interesting or not. So feel free to interrupt, and we can go on. In terms of how do I do this personal statement? As soon as you log into Advance, you're going to see this red text that you see here. It says that there's guidance about providing a COVID-19 statement. It's on the My Packet. Yeah, on the My Packet tab. This is the My Packet tab right here. Hopefully you can see my pointer. So if you click on that, it'll take you to a page that looks like this, basically the same, except this is your tab now instead of before it was the overview tab. And right here, and also in red, is the guidance on what things could be in a personal statement, some of which I showed you before, and how to add a personal statement to your packet. And in this slide, I've kind of pointed you to the ways that the steps to add a personal statement. You just click on attachments. You presumably you would have developed a personal statement and saved it as a Word document or actually a PDF document. Click browse, find the document, just indicate that it's a personal statement, and then just click upload. And in this particular example, the faculty member, Thomas Edison, said, this is a personal statement about the impact of COVID on my advancement. You don't have to call it COVID. People are going to read the personal statement no matter how you type it. The other thing that's really important, and I talk about anytime I talk about the impact of COVID on our faculty and on academic review and advancement, is recognition of the disparate impact that the pandemic is having on certain groups of people, particularly women, our underrepresented minority faculty, single parents, caregivers. And the impact is not it's not necessarily a one-time thing and then everything gets back to normal. Even if things do go back to normal, for an individual, the impact of a slower rate of progression, for example, if that's what ends up happening, kind of lingers for the career of an individual. You forever would be, for example, a year behind. And I think it's really important for reviewers at all stages of academic review to recognize that and to think about that as we're going through academic review. So going forward, I think it's really important that I make sure that we're providing useful guidance. We plan to look in a little more structured way at the personal statements that represent the challenges that faculty are going through. Again, emphasize the flexibility that I've already talked about in academic advancement. And when there are some people who really kind of bristle at kind of lowering academic standards, but there's clear language in the academic personnel manual that gives us this flexibility, and we can exercise that and decide how we want to exercise it at a campus level. And I think it's very important that we prospectively and concurrently monitor the impact on these groups that are more likely to be disadvantaged. Those are the slides that I had on COVID. I am happy to take more questions later. Otherwise, I can kind of go on to other topics.
I've just heard anecdotally a lot of concerns from faculty about this. So we did ask Dr. Aldridge to cover this today. So I just want to be sure that there aren't any additional questions about how COVID has impacted either you or your mentees' advancement.
Okay, I'll go on, but feel free to raise your hand and or type it in the chat and we'll get to it at the end. A couple of years ago, there were some changes in the health sciences clinical series that said explicitly that some scholarly or creative activity is required. Before 2018, it was actually up to the department whether they were going to require something in this particular area of review or not. Now there is a requirement, but the definition, the second bullet here, the definition of scholarly activity for this particular series is very broadly defined. And I'll give you examples of what quote unquote counts as scholarly or creative activity. If you've been around for a number of years and you had heard in the past that an individual in this series is required to demonstrate a regional or national reputation, that language is now gone from the academic personnel manual. So that is not a requirement any longer. So these are some examples that are actually listed in this system-wide enormous policy document. Actually, our campus had a very big role in terms of getting these included in the policy of the type of things that are considered scholarly or creative. Community-oriented program participation, participating in clinical guidelines or quality improvement programs, development of novel mentoring or student support programs, oversight of a lecture or seminar series, things like that. Things that certainly you wouldn't consider research under one of the other series and might not be considered, scholarly activity in the clinical X series if it weren't necessarily disseminated. There's no requirement for dissemination. And I have to say the expectation when these new kind of requirements for the HS clinical series went into effect was that our faculty were meeting these expectations. And honestly, I cannot, at least at my level, sometimes packets get filtered out before they come to me for a final decision. I don't recall a single health sciences clinical professor who would otherwise have been promoted having their promotion denied specifically because of this particular area of review. Now, what is important, and unfortunately the onus is on those of you who are in the health sciences clinical series, is to make sure that your contributions in these areas are represented in your CV and in your academic dossier in a way that points reviewers to them so that they can see them. So under research and scholarly activity or other creative activity, make sure that even if you have the contribution in another area of your CV, make sure it also goes under scholarly or creative activity. So it makes it easier for them to identify the ways in which you've met this particular requirement. Okay, accelerated advancement, I mentioned this before, that just refers to advancement more rapidly than the normal period of advancement. The bottom of the slide is the link to that gives you information on what kind of things would be considered in accelerated advancement. And I've given some examples here of things that could be considered for a one-year accelerated advancement. If you think that you qualify for an accelerated advancement, discuss it with your mentor, discuss it with your department chair. More than 1 year accelerated advancement is pretty uncommon. It's not, I wouldn't say it's rare, but it's very uncommon. In those cases, I would definitely probably engage with your dean's office to think if they think you have a good case for a 2 year or 3 year accelerated advancement. The only other thing I'll say here is that if you feel that you've done something that is really outstanding and you don't see it listed here, it doesn't mean it doesn't count. It just means that we haven't identified it explicitly, and as long as you can make sure that you make the best case possible for why your contribution really meets the intent of this accelerated advancement exceptional performance criteria. Okay, I don't want to take too much time here. These are the various steps in academic review. It goes from you to your department, then to the dean, then to CAP, then to me. This is for promotion. For merit advancements, they stop here at the dean's office. They don't go to CAP and they don't go to me first. The one thing that I did want to say is that at any step in this process, the reviewer can send the file back and ask for additional information. So if you indicated you had submitted a grant when you turned in your CV and it happens to get reviewed at the dean's office, many months or could be even a year later, and they want to know if that grant was positively scored or awarded, they could send the file back. The other thing is if it goes through this entire process and it doesn't look positive, we do not issue just a denial. We will always send it back with the language, it's a tentative denial, and please let us know if you have any information, new information that might support a different decision. So you'll always have a chance to respond or to rebut if the review, even if it went all the way up to me, didn't look favorable after all that level of review. So that's an important thing to keep in mind. Oh, the other thing to keep in mind is when your file goes from the department to the dean's office, right here, there's a 7-day period where you can actually, you'll get a notice in it from advance, and you can actually look at everything that's in your packet. You can look at the reference letters, the teaching evaluations, you can see the faculty vote, you can even see the departmental recommendation letter. And if you haven't included a personal statement, but you feel you want to, at that point in time, then that's what that 7-day window is right here. You can include a personal statement to highlight, and it'll, again, get considered at the subsequent levels of review.
Brian, there's a couple of questions that have come in if this is a good time to pause. What I think I'll do is just ask folks to unmute yourself, and then you can go ahead and just ask your question directly. The first one's from Christine Glastonbury about BCHO.
Christine actually had to leave to go to an interview.
Oh, okay. Just 4 minutes ago, she posted her question. Not sure that this is relevant to anybody else. It says, I think there was concern with BCHO, but we have found they're doing significant work in the fields you list, but just not disseminated, which is not required. Not sure I totally get the gist of the question, but maybe you do.
Yeah, again, that word dissemination, Mitch, as you know, applies primarily to the clinical X series. It doesn't apply to the health sciences clinical series.
Okay. One other question from Othman. Are you on?
Yes. Hey, this is Othman. One thing is I'm one of the pediatric cardiologists who is mostly rounding with the CVICU team. And we have residents who are, for example, on CVICU rotation. And sometimes I get them for to discuss a topic like daily or every other day. And those are not sort of structured, nor there are evaluations that I'm getting for. So I don't know how to document those. And the other question is for QI projects, the heart transplant program is fairly new, and we have a lot of meetings about how to basically improve things. And I just want to get a sense of how to document those.
Okay. In terms of interactions with trainees, Hoffman, you could work with your division, for example, to develop an evaluation tool that you distribute periodically. I mean, it sounds like it's happening fairly informally, but for example, at the end of a particular individual's rotation, so that you could capture some structured evaluation of your teaching contributions. It sounds like it doesn't exist currently. Another avenue, which if you've gone through advancement, you may already know this, is you can identify individuals who you would like to write a short letter. Letter is even kind of overstating what they need to do, but it's a series of pull down menus and an open text field for a paragraph. You can identify individuals for whom you think they might be able to speak positively of your teaching contributions, even in these informal settings. I think if you're interacting with, many dozens, for example, of folks over a review period, in that case, it might be a good idea to think about somebody that you had a particularly good relationship with, or who you feel like you know well, and you could even approach them and say, hey, I'm coming up for promotion. I'd like to ask if you wouldn't mind including a statement on the quality of my teaching. And then in terms of quality improvement, I've seen it can be, for example, as simple as a free text field in the scholarly creative contributions area that just says what it is that you do in the context of quality improvement programs. There's no structured format for how to convey that information, but the kind of things that I've seen is, I served on a committee that developed, new heart failure guidelines for a particular population, things like that. It's not a precise answer, but it's because I don't think the question you're asking doesn't require a real precise answer, because as long as you speak the truth of what it is that you've done in terms of contributing to quality improvement in the HS clinical series, I think it'll count.
Thank you so much.
There's one more that came in here from Pavitra. If you'd like to unmute yourself and ask your questions about transition from adjunct to in residence.
Thank you. I was just wondering if you could tell me a bit more about what is expected of a candidate. Like if I want to transition from the adjunct to the in-residence series, what is it that is expected of me in my CV? Because I find that the faculty handbook has a lot of information on moving within a series advancement, but not much on moving from one series to to another.
Right.
I mean, for example, how many times can I try? Like, let's say I try this year and I'm not successful. Can I try again in 2 years? And, what do you, just some kind of guidance?
Right. Yeah, that's a really good question. Well, when I showed the expectations across the 4 areas of review, you can see that there's definitely a difference in terms of expectations. So presumably you are performing at above, I had plus signs, presumably above a 1+ level in the other areas of review. In terms of assessing whether you're at the 3+ level or a 2+ level, probably the best guidance I can give is to work with your mentors and division chiefs. If you have one, you probably do, to address that issue. Another is, I don't know how comfortable, I used to do this when I was a junior and mid-level faculty member, is ask other folks within my department who are in the series that I wanted to go to if I could even look at their CV. Most people are actually proud to show you their CV, and I could actually see it and kind of compare my accomplishments. And of course, it should be kind of, it's going to be tough to compare yourself to somebody who's full professor step 6, but around kind of the rank and step that you're at or that you'd like to go to. I find that an incredibly useful way. And then the other thing is, is in a change in series, sometimes the change in series involves, like if somebody wants to go from HS clinical to in residence, for example, it could be that individual was hired and the expectation of the division chief is something very different than what the individual wants for their ultimate career. And so at some point, those different views need to be reconciled. So the division needs to, assess, okay, can we do without you at the level of clinical involvement that you've been at historically? And if the answer to that is yes, then do we want to build the expertise in the area that you want to move forward on in terms of your research as part of your in-residence research program? So for many research-focused adjunct faculty who want to move to in-residence, that conversation isn't quite that difficult. It's pretty straightforward. But for folks who are clinicians who want to become primarily, who want to significantly reduce clinical time and increase research time, that dialogue has to take place.
Thank you. That was very useful, especially the advice about asking to see other people's CVs. That didn't occur to me. So thank you for that. I was also wondering if there's any guidance on, let's say I apply this year and for various reasons it's denied. Is that something that can happen again, or is it a one-time thing, this sort of change in series?
It's not a one-time thing. My personal advice would be to position yourself in it strongly for a positive initial review, just because, and again, this is purely my own personal viewpoint. I wouldn't want to go back to my division chief and department chair, a second time or a third time. I would just feel like, I want them to really take me seriously, be on my side, advocate strongly for me. And if I've not been successful 2 times before, if I'm going to go a third time, I need to be telling them a very different story this time in order for them to be excited about supporting me.
Sure. No, it's just that there was some language in I think the faculty handbook about career review, and I wasn't sure if this is what it was referring to. So I was it's very useful to have that clarified, because I was coming more from the point of view of being sure there isn't some law or some language there that prohibits it, in which case I just need to pick the timing more carefully. Yeah,
Yeah.
but thanks.
No, I understand. Yeah, that's actually a great question, because there is language about a career review that you can only have once, but that does not apply to the situation that we're
Okay.
talking about. A career
Okay.
review is something that you can do, for example, if, say, at some point in time that your professor step 4, you realize that the folks who were hired at the same time that you were and have the same productivity are all now at professor 7, professor 8.
Okay.
And you want somebody to look at your entire career and say, look, am I at the right thing? Now, that kind of review can only happen one time.
Okay. Okay. Thanks a lot. That was very helpful.
I don't know if we have time for another question. I have, I was hired on the clinical X pathway as step 2. And I just want to get a sense of what would be a reasonable sort of timeline for when I should be thinking of or expecting the promotion to an associate professor from an assistant professor, assuming that I met all of the requirements.
Right. It's 6 years. Folks who are appointed at assistant professor step 2 normally progress to step 3 after 2 years, then step 4 after 2 years, and then after 2 years of service at step 4 would advance to associate professor step 1.
Thank you.
Any other questions, Mitch?
No, and we have about 12 minutes left, or almost 15 minutes left.
Okay. There are certain things, in terms of advance that I don't think I need to go into in much detail. I just let you know that advance, where you keep a lot of the information that goes into your CV, you can also use it to create custom CVs for things other than academic review. And you can also use it to create an NIH biosketch if you didn't know that. And you can create and save multiple different CVs and multiple NIH biosketches. This is what it looks like when you log into Advance. Down at the bottom of your screen, that's the name of your HR generalist. So if you're not sure who the person is to contact to help with your packet, getting your packet ready, usually those people reach out to you proactively, but if you need to, you can call them. It'll tell you what your titles are, your appointments. It'll tell you when your next eligible action is. When I took this screenshot, I had a packet that was in process. If you do have a packet in process, you can use the packet tracking tab here to see all the different steps in the review process, and you can track it, see how far it's gone. So here, for an action that was effective July 1 of last year, I turned in my CV on March 22nd. So what is that, 14, 15 months in advance or so. And it went to all these different stages. At some point, so this has already actually gone all through the process. There was a period where I had that 7-day review period. Then it went to the dean for a decision. And because my action was a merit, it didn't have to go beyond the dean's level. So that's why it stops there. But you can track to see where things are. And if things seem like they're not progressing, you could ask somebody why.
I do see another question. There's a hand up by Patience Abdullah.
Yes, I just had a quick question about the professional leave. So for someone who is fully funded on grants, what does a professional leave mean for you? Do you still have to fund yourself during that leave, or how does that work?
Are you at what faculty series are you in?
In resident series.
Yeah. It's the kind of thing that you would discuss with your division chief. Patients, in most cases, in residence, faculty have to fund their own professional development.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Let's see. I think we've covered the information that's here. Your promotion packet contains your CV, teaching evaluations, various other things. In advance, you can identify a proxy. If you have administrative support, you can identify a proxy to help with your CV, but ultimately, I think all the accuracy and the clarity are your responsibility. Please make sure that the accomplishments are clear to folks who are outside of your discipline. If you're using abbreviations and acronyms or the important awards that are really known within your subspecialty, but might not be known by me or the dean's office, you could even include a line about what, this award is in recognition of XYZ. Use the text, the summary text sections wisely. So there are free text sections that allow you to expand on the 4 areas of review and on things like contributions to diversity. I would encourage you not to restate the information that's in your CV, but to provide either the context or describe the impact of your work in ways that may not be apparent just from the CV template entries itself. And then if you're an individual who, by nature of the type of work you do, or your focus on collaborative or team science is, for example, a first or last author on a very small number or minority of your publications, you can use the significant publication section to really highlight in a free text field way what your unique contributions were so that they can be adequately recognized. Letters of reference, I would just say the important thing is to make sure that they come from folks who are at the rank that you're going to or above. And in terms of be strategic and perhaps discuss with your mentor or your department chair who might be good letter writers. CAP, we've talked about CAP. There's not much you can do about CAP review. CAP review, it's another level of review. Sometimes for folks who have a difficult relationship perhaps with their department chair, it's welcome to have another level of review to scrutinize the packet to see if or you don't feel as supported as you'd like to be by your chair, to have another level of review. Sometimes people view a CAP review as, well, it's just yet another hurdle that I need to get over. It's neither one nor the other. It kind of depends on your circumstances, but some actions CAP reviews, the most important ones or most impactful ones, and others like routine merits do not go to CAP. And then this is a summary slide, and I'll allow you to take a look at that while you think of questions. The only thing that I didn't say that I think is here on this slide that I added is I would encourage you to meet annually with your division chief or your chair to review your progress. At the time that you come up for a major review or even a merit review, it's good to go into that having a pretty good sense over the last couple of years how your chair or your division chief has been viewing your progress over that period of time. And if you haven't met with them at all, it may be a mystery to you how they're thinking about your career and your progress. And that's a really uncomfortable position to be in. And if you can avoid that, I'd suggest it. I think that's all that I have prepared.
Great. Any further questions? That was very information rich. Thank you, Brian.
Yeah.
Other lingering questions or clarifications from folks?
I had a quick question. I guess for the guides for accelerated advancement, I just tried to go to that website, but I couldn't load it, the information.
Okay, let's see. I clipped that. I actually just added that a few minutes before my presentation.
Okay.
Can I stop my, oh no, I want to, let's see how I can do this.
But mostly I was just curious to know, because I'm clinical X and I came in as a step 1. There's 8 years essentially in order to be able to advance. If there's a particular year, for example, if you have grants, et cetera, that you had mentioned, exceptional performance, I'd love to get more of an idea of what is considered exceptional performance.
Right.
And if there's something, if you're up for review, for example, can you ask for an additional step at that time, or do you just wait till the following year?
Oh, so you can ask for accelerated advancement. It turns out it's actually difficult to ask for accelerated advancement on the year that you're going up for a normal merit.
Okay.
Because there's no way to give you a merit to step 3, for example, plus a year credit at step 3 for step 4.
Right.
I had this problem or this issue in my own career advancement. I think at a time that I felt like I qualified for it, I was up for a normal review, and they said, well, we can't give you a 2-year acceleration, so we're just going to give you no acceleration and you're going to advance. In terms of getting a better sense of, and I'm sorry about, I'm not sure why that link is not working, but I can, let's see. Well, if I could show you if I was more facile how to find it from our website, but if you go to the Faculty and Academic Affairs website, you go to academic review, and then there's, I think, a sub-tab for review criteria. And then it's something that's called, I think, something like UCSF specific guidance or UC policy or something like that.
UC policy, okay.
Yeah, and then you see something called like guidance, something around academic advancement.
Okay.
And that link should take you to a PDF.
Okay.
And the accelerated advancement guidance starts on page 3 of it's like a 7 or 8 page document.
I see. Okay.
And I think I would suggest talking to either your division chief, chair, or dean's office about your specific accomplishment and whether that seems to warrant accelerated advancement. It really depends. I mean, like, for example, the awarding of an individual grant to a clinical ex-faculty member who isn't required to get a grant, for example, by your department review criteria, I would say wouldn't necessarily mean that you're in a good position to get an accelerated advancement.
Right.
If you had 2 or more grants, I'd say that's looking pretty good to me. If you were, a PI on a U01 grant, I would say, yeah, that's pretty spectacular for a clinical ex-faculty member. It kind of depends on the specific circumstances.
I see, but that information should be there and kind of in between each step, like what it takes to advance.
I'm sorry, I'm not sure I understand your question.
Oh, sorry. And additionally, also, I'm interested in finding out the information, how to advance more detailed information on what is required to advance between each step within this. Yeah.
Oh, you won't find anything more specific than the information that's in the PDF document that I just directed you to.
Gotcha. Okay.
Unfortunately, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. At that point, I think you need to start talking to people who participate in academic review to get a sense of whether this looks worthy or not.
I see. Okay, great. Thank you very much.
Yeah. So for example, when I was clinical ex, I was residency director, had just gone through a successful reaccreditation process and was a co-PI on an R01 grant. And I felt like those things all added together might qualify me. And then, but I was up for a normal advancement anyway. So they said, yeah, sorry, I can't give you anything more. And I didn't push it there. Knowing more as I do now, I could think of other ways to make a counter argument to that, but I didn't know how to do that at the time.
Right. Okay. Well, thank you very much.
Yep.
Brian, I've put that link in the chat. I think it should work.
Thanks, Irene.
Great. Any final question here in the last 2 minutes?
Thank you so much. This is super helpful.
Thank you. I appreciate your questions.
Thank you for that instant feedback. Appreciate it. And actually, Irene will be sending you all some evaluation also. So if you can fill that out for us, and also any suggestions for any future sessions or other topics you'd like to see covered. We'd appreciate that as well. And thank you all for joining us this afternoon. We appreciate it. And thanks again, Brian, for another great session. That's
Great. Thank you all very much. I appreciate you being here.
All right. Have a great afternoon, everyone.
Thank you. Hello.